Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Culturally Responsive Built Environments. Today we are going to talk about stone as a vernacular building material and what kind of techniques are used in the stone laying and coursing and rendering. When we talk about stone, in fact, especially in connection with the vernacular architecture studies, I would like to bring an important contribution, especially not only on stone, in terms of the materials, especially the vernacular resources and technology, and this is where the Brunskill's work on Illustrated Handbook of Vernacular Architecture and his observation throughout England and United Kingdom, how the countryside houses and how he classified the vernacular architecture in the way Amos Rappaport has classified vernacular architecture, and how material as a subject to classify material and the size as a subject to classify vernacular architecture, especially if one could take a region point of view or a country point of view or a national understanding. So initially he classifies the types of vernacular architecture into three categories. Number one, which is domestic. Number two, agricultural. And number three, industrial. So here, domestic purposes, the places, the buildings which are used for eating, sleeping, doing all kinds of kitchen, cooking, all kinds of domestic work. And it also extends not only as a dwellings, but it also can extend to the small homemade breweries or any kind of cheese making buildings. So this is basically a small cottage level buildings as well are included within the domestic. For example, if you talk about the ale houses of Nonnington and how the breweries and how the women are especially employed in particular sections of this brewery, and how they are it's a kind of a family business, or it kind of a sect who are involved in this particular business, the local economies. So that is where we refer with the domestic architecture. And the second category refers to the agricultural. So for instance, the farmsteads which are associated with the farm buildings, it's not only about there's a difference between the farmhouse and these farm buildings, which are actually associated buildings such as barn, the stable, the granary, so if you are taking about in the Dartmoors, you have these kind of long houses where you have a part of it as a stable and part of it is for animals and part of it is for the living cottage. So obviously there are barns, there's granaries which are used for storing grains in the harsh winter seasons. So there are associated purposes. So that is which are mostly relevant with the agricultural aspects. And the third aspect which he talks about, for example, which are to do with the production aspect of it. Production of it could be a lime kiln, it could be a windmills which can generate power or which can pump water supplies. So basically if you go to Amsterdam or in the Netherlands, a lot of windmills, even today they are kind of heritage orientation. So even certain lime kilns, certain cheddar making processes, and all these things, they are industrial, production oriented. So that's how he classified into the way the domestic purposes are managed, the way the agricultural purposes and associated activities that are related to agriculture managed, and that are linked with the production oriented. It could be industrial oriented, it could be windmills, it could be kilns or anything like that. And his understanding takes not only in a broader terms, but it also talks about the size types. So till now our discussion was about vernacular architecture is to do with a kind of tribal dwellings or a community level, but Brunskill, when he refers with the material aspect of it, so he classifies into 4 categories. One is the great houses. In fact, the great houses is often referred with the people of the national status, who are well known in the nation. It could be a royal family, it could be someone who is of a national repute, who used to live there, are chancellors, 16th, 17th century or in the medieval times. So how these people have lived and where they have spent their time. So that is where all these properties which has a notion of an identity, which carries an identity and to that place and even to that region. So that is where he talks about the great houses. For example, the Cadiston Hall in Derby in England. And so even that, which is referred as a kind of the place of where the royals have stayed, and so it is referred as a great house. And then slightly, I mean, if you look at the way he categorizes, it comes from the wealth and the status of it, from a very broader, from the national level to the societal and the regional level and to the community level, and not only in the societal hierarchies, but also by wealth and by the scale and by the building sizes. So the other thing he talks about the large houses. The large houses which are referred with the kind of people of some local importance. He might be the governor, or the local manor houses which we see in nearby each county areas. So some of these historic areas now, especially in Britain, they have been conserved and they have been protected, and they also form a kind of landmarks, because certain feudal lords might have stayed there, and that is how someone with a local importance has. And obviously it comes to again the peasants' dwellings and the normal cottages with the small house and the cottage. So but when you look at an vernacular understanding, because for vernacular architecture one needs a great observation, because the material might be the same in all these categories. It could be stone taken from a great house to a small cottage or a small house, but the kind of detailing it went into, the kind of understanding of the material and the kind of local understanding and the local reserves and how they tap the local resources, that is one thing one has to give emphasis, and that is where you can understand the vernacular architecture, the domestication of how the local materials are produced and how they have been brought here, and on how the skills have been. For example, on the right hand side, this is a small house when I was visiting Dartmoor. So if you could see that even the whole roof was with the slates. So it's not any tiles or anything, the stone slates, because all these houses which were constructed with the slates. So if you look back why they have constructed it, because that is where in the nearby quarries and the moors, how they get these the slate as an abundance material. So here is a small diagram, Brunskill points of what one has to notice. For instance, he talks about the first thing he prefers with on the facade, what is the walling material and what are its shape and what is its course and what is its jointing and what is its edge, the queons. So basically the queons, the jointing, the coursing will actually give the whole, talks about his whole skin. Then what kind of roofing shape and the details of verge. Is it a gable roof? Is it a hip roof? Is it a mansard roof? So what kind of detailing? And how the details at the verge, how at the ends, how the details have been brought. And not only that, the details at the eaves, how the soffit and the eaves actually been detailed out. What kind of materials, what kind of method of laying. Not only that, the ridge. So what kind of ridge? If you consider in a framed constructions, obviously in attic truss, obviously the whole thing, the wall and the roof, everything comes in one package. So in that case, how the ridge is made and how the difference in the ridges. The chimney position. Now if you take in the context of England, now there are many historical houses which have the chimneys, but in today's generation, how many of them are useful, and still why in certain why they still have the chimney in order to maintain the character of that historicity. That is one thing that goes back from not only the vernacular architecture, it goes back to the urban design and the understanding of the whole locality and its context. And what kind of water tabling and dormers. So what you see here is a kind of dormer window. In the construction of a dormer window varies by in terms of its roof type. Imagine what kind of angle, what kind of height it is getting at a sill level. So where the dormer is coming and how the dormer is functioning, what is the width of the dormer, position, shape, roofing walling material, and the plan form. Like in a long house, you have the part is a living and this part is for animals, and it is all tilted so that the water gets drained out. So similarly, what plan forms, like in Japanese Minka dwellings, we discussed about how they lived with animals, as well as how they categorize the workspace as well as the sleeping spaces. Sectional form, staircase provision, window shape, window frames, right? In recently, and at the end of this presentation, I'll be talking about how in the Chanderi, even the window frames and door frames, everything is made of stone. Door details, relationship between farm buildings and farmhouses, and the use of farm buildings. What is the purpose they are using it? So I think this is a very basic understanding of how one has to study a building. And what we'll be talking about is today about a brief techniques. This is obviously any student of architecture, he might be learning about these techniques in his first year and in the introduction to building materials and construction subjects. But still, I'm just trying to relate with the kind of study of vernacular architecture. So the moment it is not just only a broader thinking of it, the more if you are going into the study of buildings and how they could be retrofitted or how they could be conserved in some cases, you need to know the details of the construction. You need to know the understanding how the bonding, how the coursing, how the jointing, how the rendering, how the crayons have been placed. So for instance, if you look at this photograph, you can see that even the window material is all with the stone. And a few, I'll just brief you out how different arrangements of stone and what are the technicalities inside. So the first one we refer as a kind of irregular arrangement of stones. That is where we call the Kentish rag. And the second one, you see the elongated irregular types, because they are all coming from the kind of sandstone and they come in a kind of regular formats, and how they are a little elongated in shape, and this is the one format. I was in Lake District in England, and Lake District is famous for its slate and as well as the kind of stone buildings it has. So in fact, if you refer to many of the literature on the stone buildings, Lake District, you can't escape the Lake District examples. So how the quarry-faced millstone, how this is a kind of how certain constructions have been very famous because the slate is abundantly available there. And similarly in the Yorkshire, you see this is also referred as a kind of Yorkshire penance style, because the style is also denoted by its region where it is particularly used and particularly represented, because that is giving a unique character for that particular town or a village or a settlement or even a region. So when it comes to the coursing, like you see that it's an irregular rubble, but it is entirely uncoursed. There's no proper, a proper order, but they're all, it's a kind of, there's in between you have the kind of flat slab which is giving a kind of bonding sort of thing. Whereas in this picture, what you see is, it is a regular joint interrupted at intervals. So you can see here it's a regular joint, but in between it is interrupted. So you keep a big stone and then that breaks, so that kind of gives a kind of bonding. Whereas in this model, we see the brought to a level joint at regular vertical levels. So for instance, you can see here this part you are getting, so it's a kind of working as a sill band or a plinth band, or it is breaking up till the sill level. You are getting two sets of bands, and with every horizontal joint continuous. So basically these again a model of continuous. So it's slightly, if you skim it, so this is the model you are getting out. And in the quoins, especially the cornerstones are usually bigger in nature, and they are better finished than the rest. So here if you see the rubble, and then you can see at the end you have the bigger stones which are giving a great finish. And here if you look in the second model of where the corners have been emphasized with the huge stones. So there's an emphasis which has been laid out, especially you might see in the great houses as well, where the royals has lived. So there's a clear emphasis of this particular edges have been shown, because that gives the whole elegant picture of the wall, and it can also symbolize certain status as well. And in terms of jointing, if you see this model, you have the irregular stones have wide joints which have originally or later been so pointed with lime mortar or to spread over the surface. So basically the irregular stones have a wide joints because they are not in a uniform nature. So but later on it can be pointed with a kind of lime mortar. So basically you have the lime mortar finish, or it can just be spread over. So that I think in the rural villages of India also you find this thing very common. This is another technique called galleting. Little stones were pushed into joints as galleting. So basically what they do is, this you will find in Chanderi as well, in the Indian context, which we will come across. So what they do is they push small rubbles inside these bonding, so that creates a bonding. And here in this model you can see where a bedding material was unprotected, by pointing it would be leached away by rainwater to give effect of a dry joint. So you can see that, so it should get a kind of effect of a dry joint. There's a dry stone masonry where we don't use any mortar or anything, which is again prevalent in Chanderi, in the parts of Chanderi. So here what they do is they do a kind of pointing work unprotected. By pointing it would be leached away by rainwater. So but there are some issues like how the rainwater can percolate and stay. Whereas in rendering, the lime sand, the renders were used, and this was troweled to a rough surface and was dashed with pebbles, or was dashed with pebbles, was whitewashed. So here the lime sand rendering has been applied, and as well as sometimes a rough surface will be created. So basically some kind of renders will also be applied. Now coming to the ashlar masonry, which is not very common from the vernacular architecture, because till now what we talked about is a kind of very rough textured, but this is much more finished quality what you get. But still, if you look at, you need to understand the kind of techniques. Like you see here each course was uniform height, and the stones would vary in length. So you can see they vary in length. And in this case, if you say the both length of stone and height of stain could vary without substantially affecting the richness of appearance. So that is the second case. But here if you look at it, sometimes the courses were of an even height, but more often they varied height in such a way as to, so by the time you go to the top, it diminished towards the top of the height diminishes to the top of the wall, so that you have on the top you have a little projection out, and that is how it is laid. And the other way of it is also, the ashlar dressings to rubble wall gave a key of the coursing, that the way I talked about in the corners. You have the ashlar, the front, and then how the rubble is filled within it in different courses. And similarly, if you look at it here you have the similar techniques of how the edges have been taught, and here if you look at it, the quoins were stressed where there is a demand of an architectural fashion. So obviously they are dressed and they are stressed, so that it can create a particular fashion. And the main important part is the ashlar work is the fine jointing, and you can see because most of it is a kind of uniform layered. And here, though it is an ashlar work, but still they are all crudely jointed rubble. Work has been backed up into it. So whereas again the stucco, which has a smooth face plaster, and so these are various techniques in the ashlar constructions. Then coming to cobbles and pebbles. So cobbles, where we actually get the kind of round stones near the river beds. So that is where we use the cobbles, and the pebbles, which are actually, or again, very smaller ones of the pebbles, which we collect from the shore as well. So this is how the cobbles and pebbles. So you can see here. So these are all basically, the pebbles are usually less than 3 inches in diameter, and cobbles between about 3 inches and 9 inches in diameter. So you have there are different techniques how they have, like you have various things called the materials are globular and they may be flattened, and here you can see the egg shaped, and in terms of, so there are various ways how these pebbles are organized. So sometimes in a particular region, because of the sedimental flows, the whole rock surface gets smoothened, and they might segregate them into different batches, and they might use it for different purposes. And cobbles are usually laid uncoarsed and relying on clay bedding to maintain stability, and pebbles, being more uniform in size, were usually laid in courses. So when the cobbles, because they are not in a uniform nature, so they are normally laid in a uncoarsed, and whereas the pebbles, they are in courses. So the elongated pebbles you see here, the elongated pebbles or the cobbles may be in diagonal or chevron pattern. So basically you have a diagonal pattern, one on this side, one on this side. So that creates a pattern as well. And so like that, there are a few examples. So you have a mixture of both the kind of ashlar work and the cobbles fitting in, and you have the stone beds coming in the flat surfaces, and intermediate, they act like a bands in the wall which supports the strength. At the same time, you also works with the renders as well. But the main important part of this cobbles and pebbles is basically how it needs it is a very difficult work, because each piece is unique of its kind, and to put it in the wall and how you actually create a good bonding is a very difficult task. And coming to the flint, so this is also a kind of walling material which actually you get in the kind of more or less like in a kind of pebbles sort of thing. And here there's again a different techniques which they have mentioned, especially the flint walling. The exposed ends are round and irregular on surface in napped flint work. They are square, and so basically there are different ways how they can actually arrange these flint works. The one you can see here, so there's a different bands. So basically this is the flint becomes a kind of filling material in between these bands, and also on the tops how you actually create a kind of coping sort of things. And so similar to the cobbles and pebbles, you can look at all the details were given here, like for example joints are thin, forming a fine net effect over the black wall surface. So basically you see the plan here and you see the elevation, right? So basically these flints, they are actually put it like this, and intermediate they have they themselves get a kind of bonding over there. Sometimes the limestone is also combined with the flint. So here, this is basically what you got an understanding is various techniques using cobbles and pebbles, using flint, using ashlar, using random rubble masonry, the Kentish stacks. So now Looking at the process, one person I would like to refer is Oviti Akumu from Nigeria, Nairobi, who's in University of Nairobi, who was also a colleague of mine, who worked on the stone quarrying. So in fact, he actually worked on he's a building economist, and he was working on how to streamline the artisanal dimension stone. In fact, he looked at the kind of processes. One is the removal of the overburdens in the quarry, then the drilling of the stone, and the cutting stone after blasting, and the final part, how you chisel them out. How this is where the hand tools, and this is where how you want it to deliver it to the site. So that is where the whole process is about turning rock into a dimension stone. And again, we discussed about ashlar masonry, and this is also one of the form of dry stone stacking. With this photograph, what you see, there is no mortar used. Usually, when I was working in School of Planning and Architecture, Bhopal, we used to take our students to document various vernacular building typologies, sometimes completely based on mud, sometimes the whole villages are built with stone. So these are some few examples from the Chanderi district, where even the staircases, you can see the cantilever staircases and the sills, how they use to develop windows, everything is bit of stone. And not only because the whole quarries do exist there, and then that is the most abundantly available material. So you also have to understand a few technical terms like kind of bed surface, corbels, cramps. Cramps is a kind of connections between these stoneworks. It could be a metal plate, a kind of cramp which connects. Usually you find in the historic temples sort of thing. Here you see even the roofing material is very thin slabs. If you look at the girder, the stone girder here, and then these stone slabs have been, and then they filled with a kind of lime mortar or something like that, so that it doesn't leak out. But just without using any kind of mortar or anything, simply with the way the mass constructions are happen, because there are two types of construction, if you understand broadly. The one is the mass construction system, and the other is the framed construction system. So here the load, the transfers from, and the frame it distributes with the skeleton over, and in the frame you will see in the next class we'll talk about the timber, and that is where we talk about the timber framed constructions. And here you can see even the entrances, the door jambs, how they are all made completely without using any mortar. And you can see a repetitive courses here. There's a tin stone, so this is of one layer, and then you have a thin layer, horizontal layer, and then this is another layer. So in like that, within that informality there is a formal arrangement. And again, this is one thing of a render example. So people used to put a kind of slurry and the cow dung, and then they try to cover these walls, a kind of give a render, and this is all again a render. This is all the stone constructions. Even the cow sheds, how everything is built with stone. And the intricate work, if you look at the way the detail is worked out, and look at the jamb detail. So very thin slate here, and here normally what they do is they keep lamps in the evening, so that it's an auspicious thing, and a low sill windows. So this is all meant for its climatic reasons as well as the local resource. And obviously this is very unique kind of thing. And you can see the finishes, how they are joining with this cow dung and the kind of slurry what they get, and the finishes. It's almost like a kind of wattle and daub construction, but here they are embedding with the stones. And I would like to end this lecture of the stone, like a good example of Raja Rani Mahal restoration done by INTAC. One of my colleague, Professor Ramesh Bole, was involved in it, and if you look at this whole reconstruction, everything, even the doors, this is all the metal frame, and there's all the stone slabs which are intricately worked out and restored back. And now they've started a kind of digital center for the sari prints, and as well as so to empower the local economies. So this is a good example of the stone, how it is very much useful if you understand the stone construction techniques, and especially it is very important in the construction and conservation areas. Thank you very much.